Yes, you heard right. The largest and most important port in the United States is collapsing due to a lack of ships. How is it possible that the most important port in the country is paralyzed by the absence of ships? What is really happening at the heart of U.S. trade? Is this a sign of something much more serious in the global economy? This is not a local problem. It is a wake-up call for the entire global economy. In this video, I explain what is happening behind the collapse, who is responsible, and why this could be just the beginning of a much deeper crisis. The U.S. port sector is experiencing an alarming crisis. As Chinese ships reconfigure their routes following the imposition of tariffs by the former president, major ports from New York to Long Beach are on the verge of collapse. Operations are severely affected. Mass layoffs, suspension of activities, and a drastic reorientation of trade toward ports in Mexico and Canada. Will the measures taken reverse this situation, or only exacerbate a structural problem? In this video, we will analyze in detail how the policies imposed are transforming maritime trade and what impact they will have on the future of our ports. Subscribe and join us to find out.
Los barcos ya no están viniendo, no va a haber ninguna carga, no va a haber ningún trabajo para nosotros. Totalmente no vamos a trabajar, vamos a perdernos.
Amid fierce global competition, China is not content with dominating maritime trade in its region. The Asian giant also aspires to control the most strategic ports in Europe and around the world. This ambition is only part of a complex equation in the field of international trade. While China advances in its port hegemony, the United States is experiencing a real nightmare in the port sector, made up of infrastructures that were, for decades, the heart of global trade. Recent information reveals that the arrival of ships at the country's largest ports has plummeted by up to 45%, leading to massive layoffs, partial suspension of operations, and forced restructuring of trade. One of the most heartbreaking testimonies expressed by dock workers sums up the situation. No ships are coming, there will be no cargo, and therefore no work for us. This phrase has become an echo of the challenge facing the sector, where the thirst for control of trade and the reorientation of routes in favor of countries such as Mexico and Canada are leaving the United States on the brink of collapse. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so you're not the only one missing out on everything the mainstream media isn't telling you. Let's keep going. The origin of this port crisis is directly linked to the measures adopted during the administration of former President Donald Trump. By imposing a $1,000 docking fee on Chinese ships, the intention was to limit Asian dominance. However, the effect was quite different. These high fees forced Chinese ships to reorganize their routes, opting for alternative ports in nearby regions, especially in Mexico and Canada, where conditions are much more favorable. The Port of Los Angeles, considered the largest on the continent, has announced that it is evaluating a total suspension of activities, as there has been a 50% drop in ship arrivals, affecting the constant flow of essential products such as food, medicine, furniture, clothing, and appliances. Given that approximately 1/3 of goods entering or leaving the United States pass through this port, the impact on the entire supply chain is imminent and alarming. The situation in Los Angeles is worsening daily. With each ship that fails to arrive, the amount of cargo decreases dramatically, meaning that dock and warehouse workers are the first to feel the impact. Mass layoffs and partial closures of facilities are already a reality. Data from the Port of Long Beach show that demand for its services has fallen by 40%. In a week when 17 ships were expected, only 3 have arrived. And if that were not enough, the Port of Seattle reports that there have been no container ships for several days. The shutdown is so severe that thousands of truck drivers have been stranded without cargo, while dozens of transport companies are filing for bankruptcy, forced to sell off their vehicles in the desperation that only uncertainty can generate. Can you imagine the magnitude of the chaos when ports, which were the backbone of national trade, become almost deserted? Truck drivers, a key part of ground logistics, are experiencing unprecedented vulnerability. Reports indicate that in California alone, up to 1 million jobs could be lost in May. Given that there is a direct relationship between the number of containers and job opportunities, if every 4 containers equals 1 job, the drop in cargo translates into thousands of lost jobs. Furthermore, it is paradoxical that, according to surveys, up to 90% of port workers voted for Trump in previous elections, which has sparked outrage in a community of more than 50,000 truck drivers. Feeling betrayed, some are even threatening to block the country in a cry for real and urgent solutions. However, Trump has responded coldly, proud of having forced Chinese ships to turn around in the Pacific, arguing that these imposing vessels need more than 15 kilometers to maneuver properly, and assuring that the United States will soon be manufacturing its own ships again. This ambitious statement suggests that the construction of a national shipbuilding industry could reshape trade. Although in the meantime we could face up to 10 years of commercial isolation, exacerbating an infrastructure and employment crisis. The reorientation of global trade, however, not only marks the decline of U.S. ports, but also provides opportunities for other players in the region. The Port of Vancouver, Canada, has managed to capture approximately 40% of the traffic lost between Seattle and Los Angeles, becoming a new favorite destination for Chinese cargo ships seeking to avoid tariffs imposed on U.S. territory. Chinese companies, taking advantage of favorable conditions, have opted to unload their products in Canada and then transport them by road to the rest of the North American market. At the same time, another port that has emerged as a strategic alternative is Manzanillo, Mexico, which is receiving containers that were previously bound for California. From Manzanillo, numerous trains send the merchandise to both the United States and Canada, positioning this port as an option to avoid high tariffs and instability at U.S. ports. Recently, President Claudia Sheinbaum announced that construction of a new port in Manzanillo will be accelerated. According to her statements, this ambitious project will be designed to receive 60% of the Chinese ships that, until now, were headed for California. If implemented, this measure could transform Manzanillo into the busiest terminal on the continent, reconfiguring not only regional logistics, but also the map of world trade. Strategically located in Quietland Bay, in the Diutal Lagoon, the new port is described as extraordinary by experts. The changes in shipping routes and the reorientation of trade are clear indicators that the United States is losing its centrality in global trade. The exodus of companies and capital flight are palpable, and many analysts argue that the country is isolating itself by failing to offer competitive conditions for investment. While some ports are still operating, the general perception is that the United States is becoming less and less relevant in the global arena, a fact reflected in the arrival of empty ships due to last-minute cancellations, despite the high costs of services such as water, electricity, and maintenance that they must face. Remember to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on everything that is coming our way. Let's keep going. In this uncertain environment, the future of U.S. ports looks increasingly bleak. Experts warn that if the situation persists, the country's 2 most important ports could go bankrupt in the next 6 months, leaving nearly 2 million workers unemployed. The streets surrounding these ports have already been transformed into scenes of despair, where distress statements from workers can be heard. The ships are no longer coming. There will be no cargo. There will be no work for us. These words reveal the severity of a crisis that threatens to have devastating consequences for an entire industry and for the lives of hundreds of thousands of families who depend on maritime trade. Faced with this bleak outlook, the White House is considering temporarily closing smaller ports to concentrate trade in megaports, those with the most infrastructure, in order to avoid a total collapse. Visiting some of these ports today, one can see a desolate scene. Almost deserted docks and storage areas where hardly any containers are in use. The irony of the situation is palpable. In a country that was once the heart of international trade, The lack of activity now translates into uncertainty about the supply of goods, especially in the run-up to the end-of-year festivities. The immediate future of these infrastructures will depend critically on the next 2 months, a crucial period for the supply of products needed for the December celebrations. If ships do not begin to arrive in sufficient numbers, the disruption in the supply chain could have a domino effect, from product shortages in supermarkets to excessive price increases, directly affecting the purchasing power of millions of families. The logistics chain, which includes transporters, crane operators, and warehouse workers, is at risk, and the impact extends throughout the entire national economy. We cannot ignore the fact that this port crisis is not an isolated phenomenon. The lack of manpower and the drop in the flow of goods are also affecting other essential sectors of the economy, such as livestock farming. On several ranches, the absence of workers is jeopardizing the basic care of the animals. Some producers say that if cows are not milked on time, they could suffer irreparable damage, which would translate into devastating economic losses for an industry that, like maritime trade, depends on uninterrupted operations. Imagine the future of an entire farm at stake, because there is simply no one to meet the basic needs of the animals. The interconnection between labor shortages in ports and their effect on food production is undeniable. Every grain lost, every liter of milk not produced, represents both an economic loss and a loss of pride for a sector that has been sustained for decades thanks to the strength and dedication of committed workers. Communication channels have been flooded with alarm messages. The realization that the ships are no longer coming is a collective cry from workers who depend on maritime trade for their livelihoods. The repercussions are not limited to numbers and statistics. They are reflected in the daily lives of dock workers, in the long lines of trucks waiting to load containers, and in the discouragement of terminal managers. The situation is so urgent that, if not rectified immediately, a collapse is expected that will affect not only trade, but also food security and the economic stability of entire regions. In this complex scenario, it should be noted that, although the main focus is on the port crisis, the situation requires comprehensive measures. Although this analysis has primarily addressed the impact on ports and commercial logistics, it is undeniable that a small part of this problem is also related to the need to regularize and improve working conditions in adjacent sectors. This aspect, although secondary in the present discussion, constitutes another link in the chain that sustained the economy, highlighting the importance of a holistic approach to solutions. In short, what we are facing today is an immense challenge that transcends the mere stabilization of a commercial season or the maintenance of the usual flow of goods in our ports. The current port crisis, characterized by a drastic drop in ship arrivals, massive layoffs, and the imminent threat of closure of key infrastructure, has sparked a profound debate about the future of maritime trade, economic competitiveness, and job security for millions of workers. While some business leaders and authorities argue that concentrating trade in megaports and urgently modernizing infrastructure is the only way to avoid total collapse, others warn that without structural interventions and a comprehensive overhaul of logistics policies, the consequences will be devastating for the entire supply chain. Uncertainty is palpable when contemplating the possibility of seeing the port system, which for decades has been the engine driving global trade and the national economy, disappear. Will it be possible to reverse this trend and build, once and for all, a system in which efficiency, respect for workers, and stability are the norm? Although other sectors, such as agriculture, are also experiencing serious problems, today we are focusing on the crisis that is hitting our ports hard. Your opinion is essential in this debate. Leave your comment and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that, together, we can drive the real change that this country demands.